Okay, hi everyone. We're going to be making the Saturday white bread, our first lab for the semester and my first demonstration. So for this first demonstration, what I'd like to do is start by showing you our mise en place, which will be all the tools and equipment and the ingredients that you need to complete the recipe. Okay. So in no particular order here, let me go through the equipment first. I have the flexible bowl scraper. If you don't have this, the flexible rubber spatula will work. I also have digital scale. I have the liquid measuring cup. I have my measuring spoons. Half sheet pan lined with parchment paper for baking the bread. Or if you happen to have this item, which would be a covered ceramic casserole dish, or stoneware or earthenware, or a covered cast iron pan, works well to make the crusty loaf of bread. And then finally, I have the larger plastic tub for fermenting our dough. If you don't have this, just a larger mixing bowl will work. Okay, so that's the equipment. Then in the ingredients, for the lean loaf of bread, are as basic as can be. We have the flour. Here I have 500 grams of all-purpose flour already weighed out or scaled out. I'm gonna measure the water in a minute and I'll show you that. The salt will be 10 grams. I already have that weighed. And then, hang on one sec. The dry active yeast is 3 grams, or approximately 3/4 of a teaspoon. That's already scaled out. And I have a pinch of salt. Okay, so what I'd like to do is show you how I measure the water. We're gonna start with 180 grams for proofing the yeast. So what I like to do, for those of you who have the digital scale, I work with the liquid measurer, and then I use the scale sort of as a backup or a secondary form of measuring. Okay, so I'm gonna put the empty liquid measurer on the scale. I've toggled over to the metric system, and then I zero out, okay? Now my water is already warm to approximately 105 degrees. So what I'm gonna do with the empty measurer on the scale is I'm gonna scale out 180 grams of water. So the way I do this is just pour slowly. As I start to approach 180, I go slow, just go a few drops at a time till I get to 180. And then, which if you eyeball on this numbers on the side of the measuring cup, you'll be right at 180. So like I said, for those of you who don't have the digital scale, you can simply eyeball it using your liquid measurer, but for those who have the scale, it's a more accurate way to measure. Okay, so the first step we're gonna do is proof the yeast. In the warm water, I'm gonna take all my dry active yeast, pour it in there, along with the pinch of salt. Okay. Then, one item I didn't take out is a spoon, because all you want to do is gently stir your yeast in the water. At first, the yeast is gonna look clumpy or lumpy in the water, but as it starts to dissolve in the water, those lumps will dissipate. And this process is going to take about 5, maybe 10 minutes. What we want to do is we're verifying that the yeast is alive. So, and we do that by number one, watching that it all dissolves, and number two, the liquid will become bubbly. And I'll show you what that looks like. But that's what you're looking for, and it's, like I said, it's going to take about 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, so we'll just let this rest, and I'll show you when it's done. Okay, I've proofed my yeast, and we're ready to proceed with the recipe for the mixing stage. So I want you guys to see the yeast now that it's dissolved and proofed. The top of the water starts to look white and foamy, and bubbles appear. I don't see any granules of yeast anymore, so I know it's entirely dissolved, and it still feels warm, and we're ready to go. Okay, so I have my mixing container. If you don't have the large plastic container, you'll use a mixing bowl, which will be fine. My flour is scaled out, 500 grams. I'm going to add that to my larger mixing container. The salt will go in. I'm just going to give that a stir to help distribute the salt. Then my water with yeast. Make sure you empty and get all of the yeast in. And then my second measurement of 180 grams of water will go in as well. Okay, so now I have all the ingredients in, and what I'm gonna do is use my hand to give that a stir, okay? I keep my flexible bowl scraper nearby because as need be, I use it to clean off my fingers. The other thing I keep on hand is another extra container of water that I will occasionally dip my fingers into to get them wet, and that helps, it somewhat prevents the sticking with the dough. So I have another container that I'll just dip my fingers in occasionally. Okay, so the way that this mixing process works is I'm gently folding, which means taking the dry ingredients from the bottom and folding it over the top. Now this mixing process should take approximately 5 minutes. Again, I'm going to clean off my fingers. Keeping all of that dough still in our container or our bowl so we don't lose that product, but just cleaning my fingers off so it's easier to work. And then again, dipping in the water. Now, one of the reasons I chose this recipe is because it takes we're not using a mixer to do the kneading and the mixing and the fermenting of the dough. We're gonna allow a longer fermentation period, and I thought that would work well since we're not constrained to a certain time limit in lab at the kitchen, and I thought for all of you at home, you would have the flexibility to take more time to allow the gluten to develop and the fermentation process to take a little longer. Okay, we're almost there. Now, again, like I said, this part of the process, the mixing phase, should take about 5 minutes. And then the dough is going to have to rest and relax before we move on to the secondary folding stage. gonna give it just a little bit more. Just keep folding it on top of each other, mixing the dry into the wet. As I fold, the other technique that I want to use is the pincher method, where I use my thumb and forefinger as pinchers, pinching the dough together and sort of cutting it with those two fingers. Okay, I'm gonna clean my fingers off, get all the dough off stuck to my fingers, leave that in the container with the bowl, and then we're gonna let it rest. Before we do our first fold. One more dip. As I do this, the dough starts to get structure because the gluten strands start to form. I'm gonna take it out of here just so you guys can see it real quick. Okay, so it holds together now. Back in the bowl, fold it on top of each other. Now I'm just gonna let it rest. Okay.